A cat gives birth alone in a cupboard. A horse drops a foal in a field, and it stands within the hour. Human birth can kill you, and for most of our history, it regularly did. You did not arrive quietly, and you did not arrive alone. Somebody was there. Somebody had to be. Almost every human who has ever been born came into the world with other hands waiting, and that is not a cultural habit or a modern hospital invention. It is a consequence of how your body is built. Most people assume birth is simply painful, the way everything in nature is a bit brutal. That's not quite right. Human birth is mechanically strange in a way that has puzzled anthropologists for over 60 years, and the reason is still being argued about right now. Start with the problem itself, because it is almost absurd when you put the two things side by side. A human newborn's head is enormous. Not just large for a baby, but large relative to the passage it has to travel through. In most of our closest relatives, the fit is comfortable. A chimpanzee infant's head has room to spare on the way out, and chimpanzee births are typically fast. In humans, the head and the birth canal are close to the same size. The margin is small enough that anatomy has to compensate for it, and it does, in a way you can feel on any newborn. A baby's skull is not one solid piece of bone. It is several separate plates connected by flexible seams with soft gaps between them. That is the soft spot on top of a newborn's head. It is not an unfinished skull. It is a design that lets the head temporarily change shape. During birth, those plates can slide and overlap, narrowing the skull enough to get through, which is why plenty of babies arrive with a briefly pointed or lopsided head that rounds out over the following days. Your skull was, for a few hours, a piece of collapsible luggage. But squeezing the head is only the first difficulty. The second one is the shape of the tunnel. Because your pelvis is not a simple ring. It is a bipedal pelvis, rebuilt over millions of years to carry your entire upper body while you walk on two legs. And that rebuilding left it twisted. The widest direction at the entrance of the canal is not the widest direction at the exit, which means a baby can't simply travel in a straight line in one orientation and come out. It has to turn on the way through. It enters lined up one way, and partway down it rotates so that its widest dimension keeps matching whatever the tunnel is doing at that depth. That rotation is the part almost nobody pictures. Being born is not a fall. It is a slow, forced corkscrew through a passage that changes shape as you go. And now, here is where it gets stranger, and where it stops being a story about difficulty and becomes a story about other people. Because of that rotation, human babies usually emerge facing backwards, away from the mother, not towards her. And that one detail changes everything. Watch almost any other primate give birth, and you will see the mother reach down as the infant appears, guide it, sometimes pull it gently forward, clear its face, and bring it straight to her chest. She can do this because the infant comes out facing her. A human mother cannot safely do the same thing. If she reaches down and pulls a baby that is facing away from her, she's bending its head and neck backwards against the natural direction of its spine. The safest thing for her to do, with the most urgent instinct in the world, is to not act on it. So somebody else has to. The anthropologist Wenda Trevathan gave this consequence a name: obligate midwifery. The idea is that the mechanics of human birth make assistance not merely helpful, but effectively required, and that this pressure has been shaping our species for a very long time. Which produces a quietly astonishing conclusion. Cooperation was not something humans invented later, once we had language and villages and spare time to be kind to each other. For most of our history, cooperation was the condition of arriving at all. Now, in fairness, this picture has been getting more complicated, and the honest version is more interesting than the tidy one. Researchers observing chimpanzee births have argued that they involve rotation too, and that humans are not as unique in this as the textbook version suggests. And in 2018, researchers reported bonobo females gathering around and protecting a female while she gave birth, which looks uncomfortably like attendance. So the line is blurrier than humans need help and animals do not. What holds up is the degree. In humans, it is not an occasional advantage, it is close to a rule. There is one more measure of how awkward this is, and it is the simplest one: time. A chimpanzee birth is usually over quickly, often within minutes once it is properly underway. Human labor is measured in hours, and for a first birth, it can run most of a day. That is a very long window in which something can go wrong, and it is a very long window in which a mother is exhausted, vulnerable, and unable to protect herself. In an environment with predators, weather, and no shelter, the sheer duration of human birth is itself a danger, quite apart from the mechanics. It is one more reason the sensible arrangement is other people standing around you. And then there is the other half of the problem, which is what actually comes out at the end of all this. A foal stands within an hour. A wildebeest calf runs on its first day because out on open ground, a calf that cannot run is a calf that gets eaten. A newborn chimpanzee can grip its mother's fur tightly enough to hang on while she moves. Now consider a human newborn. It cannot walk, it cannot crawl, it cannot hold up its own head, it cannot cling, it cannot regulate its own temperature well, it cannot do one single thing to keep itself alive. And it stays that way, roughly, for a year. By the standards of the rest of the animal kingdom, you were born unfinished. Some researchers describe human infants as effectively spending a fourth trimester outside the body, doing development that other species complete before they are born. And the organ that explains most of this is the one that finishes last. A human newborn's brain is a far smaller fraction of its eventual adult size than a chimpanzee's is at birth, which means an enormous amount of your brain was built after you were already out in the world, being carried around, hearing voices, being handled by people. A chimpanzee arrives closer to finished. You arrived as a construction site. Everything you eventually became was assembled in the open, in company, rather than in the dark and in private. And that is only possible if somebody is there to keep the construction site alive while it works. So why on earth would evolution do that? Why produce a baby that barely fits, has to turn to get out, needs a bystander, and then arrives helpless? The classic answer is over 60 years old, and it is elegant enough that it took over the textbooks. In 1960, the anthropologist Sherwood Washburn called it the obstetrical dilemma. The argument is a trade-off between two things that both mattered enormously. Walking upright efficiently favors a narrow pelvis. Getting smarter favors a big-brained newborn, which needs a wide one. You cannot maximize both. So, the story goes, evolution split the difference. Babies are pushed out earlier in development, while the head is still small enough to pass, and the rest of the growing happens outside. On this account, your helplessness is not a flaw. It is the price of a species that both walks and thinks. It is a beautiful explanation. And a serious challenge to it arrived in 2012. Holly Dunsworth and her colleagues asked a simple question with an awkward answer. What actually ends a pregnancy? Their argument is that the limit is not the pelvis at all, but the mother's metabolism. Growing a fetus costs energy, and that cost climbs steeply as the fetus gets bigger. On their account, pregnancy ends roughly when a mother's body approaches the ceiling of energy it can sustainably supply, not when the baby stops fitting. They also questioned whether a slightly wider pelvis would really wreck walking efficiency the way the classic story assumes. If they are right, then birth being hard is a side effect, not the central design constraint. The argument did not end there, and this is the part that most explainers skip. Other researchers pushed back hard. Work published in 2021 and 2023 defended the obstetrical dilemma, pointing out that the female pelvis does show changes that look specifically obstetric rather than merely structural, including evidence that it develops differently across a woman's reproductive years. The honest position today is that there is a real unresolved argument among serious people about why human birth is difficult. What nobody disputes is that it is difficult. And here is the thing worth holding on to, whichever side eventually wins. Both explanations arrive at the same doorstep. Whether your head barely fit because of a walking versus thinking trade-off, or you were evicted early because your mother's body hit an energy ceiling, the outcome for you was identical. You came out through a twisted passage, turning as you went, facing the wrong way to be caught by the one person most desperate to catch you. And then you lay there, unable to lift your own head, entirely dependent on somebody choosing to pick you up. That is the fact underneath all the anatomy. Every single person in your ancestry, without one exception, was born that way and survived it. Which means every single one of them was helped. Not most of them, all of them. There is an unbroken chain of people being caught, cleaned, warmed, and carried, running backwards from you through every generation that has ever existed. And if that chain had broken even once in any century, you would not be here to find any of this strange. We tend to think of our great achievements as the things we did once we were strong. Tools, fire, language, cities. But the first thing that ever happened to you before you had a name, a memory, or a single thought was that you could not manage alone, and somebody handled it. You did not begin as an independent creature who later learned to cooperate. You began as a creature that could not have existed without cooperation, and you have been that creature ever since. So the next time you see a newborn, look at the shape of its head and at how it cannot hold that head up. That is not fragility. That is the visible cost of walking upright, or of a metabolism that ran out of room, and either way, it is the reason somebody had to be standing there. You were not delivered into the world, you were handed into it. Nothing is as ordinary as it looks.